Let me begin by thanking you all for being here, because we have a message that we think the public needs to be aware of, and you're going to help us get that message out there. Obviously, our community has been through some pretty tough times the last week, and as law enforcement officials, we're going to do our part to do the best we can to help the victims who are out there in the legal process. Times like these give fraudsters opportunities to prey on poor, unwitting people in our community. And what I mean by that is there's a number of folks out there that will devise schemes to defraud people who are looking for assistance and people who are looking to help people who need assistance. There are three types of fraud that we generally see out there: charity fraud, consumer fraud, and program fraud. During Katrina, this district alone prosecuted near 100 people and about 110 defendants, 105 right around there. But it was a significant number. I believe we're still prosecuting some of those folks today. So let me turn to the first point that I talked about, charity fraud. There's a lot of good people in our community who are wanting to give money to charities so that that money could go to people who need it to reestablish their lives, to rebuild their homes, to rebuild their lives. And as an example, people will use variations of the Red Cross, American Red Cross, to set up their own internet websites. And they'll change a letter, they'll change a word here and there, and people believe that they're actually donating to the American Red Cross. Well, really, the American Red Cross is www.redcross.org. But they'll use net, or they'll use any variation. Now, the Red Cross does a lot of work in times like these. They don't send people generally to street corners to collect in cans or in buckets. People may go out there and do those collections on their own, but the Red Cross doesn't do that. But the Red Cross doesn't solicit people via telephone, so they don't have telemarketers calling up to get money. But there are folks who will claim to be Red Cross employees calling about help with the Red Cross. Now, the only time that the Red Cross does call via telephone is to solicit donations for blood. So they will ask folks to come in as part of a blood drive. And the Red Cross will never ask for your personal identification information. They won't get your birth date, your social security number, all those bits and pieces of information that fraudsters will use to gain access to your financial personal information. What we would ask folks to do is to donate to charities that they are aware of, that they know are legitimate, that they have dealt with in the past. And these are charities that we know and they know are legitimate. If they have a question, whether it's an internet charity or one of those, they need to be very careful about where they're sending their money. Secondly, consumer fraud. We're going to see a lot of contractors from within the city, but we're going to see a lot from out of town and maybe some from out of state. A number of those will come in and say, well, give me $5,000 so I could buy all of the materials that we're going to need to rebuild your home. Well, if folks are asking you to front money, you have to be very careful, because we've had a number of cases in the past where folks come in, they collect money, and then the poor people that are trying to have their home rebuilt never see those folks again. In those cases, our citizens should rely on the Better Business Bureau if they have questions about the contractors that they're dealing with. And third, program fraud. The government obviously has a lot of concern for a number of people who are displaced, who lost their homes, property, vehicles, that sort of thing. We'll have folks that impersonate FEMA. And those folks generally ask for money up front. FEMA will never ask for money up front. They don't do that. And then we have, on a more pernicious scale, the folks, we have these India call centers, people who call up from overseas and are asking or telling folks that they're able to provide assistance as a result of this fraud. And they're asking, again, for personal identification information. Folks should not make that information available to anybody calling over the phone. Those are generally the three types of frauds that we see. What I'm going to have the folks that we do this afternoon is to come to the microphone and tell you more specifically what they see and how they can make folks in our community aware of the types of fraud that are out there. Before we do that, I want to hear Kim Ogg and I are working. We're going to be working cases closely together. And Kim, at this time.
Thank you, Ray. Thank you, members of the media and the community, for joining us today. I'm Kim Ogg. I'm the elected district attorney of Harris County. And I'm here with a warning to all who would prey upon our community in its most vulnerable time. if you are thinking about committing fraud, submitting a fraudulent application to the government, ripping off somebody on a contracting deal, stealing people's identities, know that if you are caught, the full weight of the law, both federal and state, will be upon you. And it's likely that you will be caught. I'm also here to thank the public for telling us about the burglaries and the looting that they saw, and for reporting those few crimes when they did happen. They reported them directly to law enforcement, and the people who were doing it were caught and are in the Harris County Jail now. With that, I'd like to report on the extent of crime. During what has been described as the biggest natural disaster in American history, only about 100 cases of looting, an enhanced crime during a period of disaster, as it's been called by our governor and our president. Only about 100 cases of looting have occurred in a county of 5 million people. This speaks to the way Houstonians work and come together, especially in times of trouble. It's been a hallmark of our region, and it flows into law enforcement. You can see that the federal government, the state government, and the local government are here working together. And we've combined our resources to protect the public, and that works. And because we've had such good cooperation and such strong response from our citizenry and our first responders, 100 cases, more or less, of looting in a 9-day period. Now, we are approaching what our financial crimes chief calls an incubation period for fraud. We know that those who've been using the national hotline are reporting fraudulent contractors and FEMA reps, that kind of thing, south of us. And we feel as the disaster and our floodwaters recede, those same criminal individuals are likely headed our way. Well, we're ready for them. Use the fraud hotline to report anything that you think is suspicious. They will vet the claims, they will determine if they're criminal or civil, and they'll keep certain cases here at the federal level, and other cases will be referred to us in the local district attorney's office to handle. There's not going to be a shortage of work or workers. And with that, questions have been asked about, is the district attorney's office functioning? Of course we are. We've been functioning 24/7 through and since the hurricane. Our intake division has supported law enforcement, and while we are only a tiny cog in the wheel and certainly not doing the work of our first responders, we've been there to vet their cases and ensure that the criminals they catch have gone to jail. And I think with that, all we want to tell our public is that we're behind you. And if you are concerned about somebody who comes to your door, just use some common sense. Don't open that door without an identification. Ask to see the person's identification. Ask them to wait outside on the other side of that locked door while you check them out. Should they represent themselves to be from some kind of law enforcement agency, ask to see their ID and not just a simple gold badge. You need their name, you need their agency, and you need to see their actual identification. Contact that agency. Check them out. If you're concerned about contractors approaching you or approaching individuals with repair work, call the Better Business Bureau. Check them out. Look to see if their contract specifies what job they will be performing. And make sure you use good common sense in checking people out. Money up front, advancements, be careful of. Sometimes that's the way contractors work, but more often it'll be spelled out in your contract exactly what money is needed and for what up front. And if they run off with your money, call the hotline. Finally, I just want to thank the people who have been saving lives out there. Law enforcement has been in first responder mode. They've been rescuing people. It's important for our public to know that they have transitioned in this last week and are still transitioning back to regular operations. That means that these low filings, just a few bad apple looters that were out there, are now being replaced by the folks who commit crimes kind of on an ongoing or regular basis. And so our numbers are back up to about 250 arrests that we're seeing in our intake division a day. And so law and order continues. There are changes that will be happening in the criminal justice system. I'd be happy to respond to questions from reporters after this press conference, questions about the courthouse system, etc. But it's important for our public to know that there was never a discontinuation of services. There was never a disruption. And your first responders have been in touch with your DA and your U.S. Attorney this whole time. And we are very, very honored to serve the public and to help law enforcement and our first responders protect the public. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. My name is David Green. I am the Special Agent in charge for the Department of Homeland Security Office of Inspector General. The Houston and San Antonio districts have assigned all available resources to ensure the American taxpayer does not foot the bill for those who commit fraud. We all suffer when federal programs are undermined by fraud. I assure the citizens of Texas that the Homeland Security's Office of Inspector General will not tolerate fraud schemes, specifically individuals who apply for assistance and did not suffer any damage. Contractors who intend to defraud our citizens by asking for a large initial investment for materials and do not complete the jobs, or worse, after taking the money are never seen again. And companies who contract with cities and counties to remove debris, for example, who submit false billing to FEMA and or for personnel, equipment, or work that was never performed. We will continue to aggressively attack the corrupt and greed-driven criminal schemes that threaten our disaster-stricken areas. As a reminder, no one from FEMA will ask you for money to file their disaster claim or to conduct an inspection. If you're asked to pay anything while applying for disaster assistance, it's a scam. Please call the disaster hotline to report fraud. The number's on your screen. And our special agents are on the ground and actively investigating these allegations. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Perry Turner, Special Agent in charge of the Houston FBI Field Office. I want to take this opportunity to publicly thank our law enforcement partners who have been working nonstop to save lives and protect property. Most importantly, I want to thank the men and women of the FBI who have been working tirelessly at their office or from home, coordinating logistical efforts and carrying on with our mission. Your sacrifice to your co-workers, the city of Houston, and beyond is inspiring. As we all work together to rebuild the Houston Gulf Coast region and look for ways to help, it is important to perform due diligence before giving contributions to anyone soliciting donations or individuals offering to provide assistance to those affected by Hurricane Harvey, whether solicitations are in person, via email, or by telephone. It is okay to question and to be circumspect. Before you donate your hard-earned money, before you sign a contract for repair work, inquire with the Better Business Bureau, check references, and use internet-based resources that may assist in confirming the entity or individuals contacting you. The FBI is dedicated to investigating and preventing fraud, especially when it involves preying on individuals during time of great need. If you suspect fraud, you need to report it to protect yourself, your neighbors, and your community. We must work together and eradicate fraud and keep the Houston area safe. Thank you.
Good afternoon. My name is Douglas Thigpen. I'm the Special Agent in charge of the United States Secret Service Houston Field Office. First, I'd like to offer my thoughts and prayers to the citizens of Houston during this very trying time. The Secret Service has a presence at the National Center for Disaster Fraud with an emphasis on wire fraud and identity theft. If you feel like you've been a victim of wire fraud or identity theft, please contact the National Center for Disaster Fraud and make a report. That information will be compiled and routed to the Secret Service for further investigations. Thank you.
Good morning, good afternoon. I am Phyllis Robinson. I'm the Special Agent in charge with HUD, Office of the Inspector General for the Southwest region. And I would like to also thank our law enforcement partners represented here, local, state, and federal. And I'd also like to thank my local office, two of my agents who are here along with the Assistant Special Agent in Charge. They've been on the ground from day one helping those in need. HUD OIG has been a part of the public safety response related to the aftermath of Hurricane Harvey since landfall. As we begin the transition from response to recovery, we will continue to be a part of the unified federal presence here to combat disaster-related fraud. The mission of HUD OIG is to investigate cases of waste, fraud, and abuse, and to ensure the integrity of HUD-directed disaster relief resources. Unfortunately, as we collectively begin to go about the process of rebuilding, it is important for the general public to become increasingly aware of unscrupulous individuals, businesses, and other third parties that may seek to defraud you and your family, as well as federal HUD disaster assistance programs. It is important for all citizens to be aware, first and foremost, there is never a charge to apply for HUD federal disaster assistance or federal housing assistance, as been mentioned by FEMA. Please contact the National Center 1-800 number, and if by chance you are not getting through there, please contact HUD hotline at hotline@hudoig.gov or visit hudoig.gov. Thank you.
Hello, I'm TJ Gaylor. I'm the Special Agent in Charge for the Small Business Administration's Office of Inspector General here in Houston. I just want to start by saying that the SBA OIG is poised to join our law enforcement partners in the effort to bring to justice any individuals involved in fraud schemes against SBA's Hurricane Harvey disaster effort. We have a deep and long-standing commitment to law enforcement partnerships that bring those who seek to take advantage of taxpayer-provided assistance to justice, and this disaster will be no different. I'd like to point out that with people that have been victimized by the hurricane that found themselves in the wake, be wary of unsolicited internet or phone contacts claiming affiliation with the Small Business Administration. If you get such contacts, please look for a .gov at the end of any website that's provided, or a .gov at the end of any email that's provided for contact. And that includes seeing .gov in the middle of an email where you have .com that follows. That's not the way a government email would look. It's going to end with .gov. Contact SBA directly to verify validity. If you have any questions about someone that's contacted you, advising that they can help you with that assistance. And if someone asks for money up front, as you've heard several times this afternoon, that's not how SBA assistance works. That's not going to be legitimate, and you should report that, please, to the National Hotline. Don't pay someone to process your application. That's something that you can do, and that's something that SBA employees will help you work through. There will be SBA people to help you process that. If you do choose to go through someone for assistance in preparing your application for a loan for disaster assistance, please review all the documents carefully. Less scrupulous preparers may promise approvals and alter your information to get you qualified. If you sign the loan-related documents, you are accountable in the end for its accuracy. And ultimately, report fraud. If you see neighbors or other folks in the community that didn't have storm damage, but they're talking about having received SBA loan monies, please remember that the SBA loan monies are taxpayer monies. Those are ultimately your dollars that are being handed out to help your fellow man. If that money's going out, it's a limited pot. So if somebody's getting that through fraud, that means that's that much money that's not available for somebody that needs it desperately. So please report that also to the National Hotline. I thank you for your time.
Before we take some questions, I just want to reiterate something that Kim said. During this entire storm, folks from the DA's office as well as the Attorney's office, in conjunction with all our law enforcement folks, were working tirelessly to ensure that people were safe. Agents from outside of Houston came to ensure that folks who would use the opportunity to try to steal guns or loot property were placed into check by local law enforcement. So no question about it, as Kim Ogg has told you, law enforcement was very aggressive, as have been prosecutors' offices like ours and all the folks behind me. At this point, we'll take questions. Anybody? For any one of the folks that's standing up here, if you have any questions you want to ask. Yes?
Are there any ongoing investigations currently as part of the fraud, potential fraud going on?
There are. I'm going to let David Green answer that question.
Yes, sir. There are some current ongoing investigations in our area.
Number of referrals you have.
So far, we're looking at about 80 that have been vetted, and we're going through those. But with the number of applications being over 500,000, we're expecting that number to climb significantly.
When you say 80 cases, like, what are we talking about? Can you say generally, or?
Well, without getting in specifics, allegations have been made, and these are investigations that are most probably going to be assigned for further investigation.
But allegations of some type of fraud?
That's correct. Yes, sir.
What are the penalties for that? For those, obviously they vary, but
On the federal level, everything is based on the guideline, and the numbers of the amount of fraud that's involved will determine how strict the punishment will be. So it's difficult to say what the punishment will be without knowing what the amount of fraud is, but it all depends on how much fraud is involved. I'll let Kim talk about what that looks like on the state level.
So at the state level, theft and fraud crimes are value-based. So the amount that is taken or attempted to be taken generally controls the level of offense that a criminal is charged with. And the value breaks are at $500, $2,500, et cetera. And above $2,500, you get into felony range. That's easy to do during these times. And a felony charge carries a bail that you can't get out on a PR bond with generally. It carries the cost of hiring a lawyer or having one appointed that then you're responsible for, and it usually entails the possibility of penitentiary time.
What's the status of the criminal courthouse?
Well, the building is damaged, and the district attorney's office is being asked to relocate, which we will. We're going to move from one government building, in all likelihood, to another government building, and have been making plans this last week and a half to do that. The extent of the damage is best, those questions are best directed to the county engineer.
Last question, sorry. So, just a quick
Is it for me?
I think so.
Okay.
Sorry. What are some of the victims' rights for potential fraud? You could, like, maybe suitcases or something like that.
It's a great question. Crime victims do have rights under Texas law, and those rights include the right to be notified about what's going on with their cases, to be informed about court dates, and to file for restitution first against the criminal, who we will try and, as part of a plea bargain, recover. And if the person is going to the penitentiary and going to spend more jail time than they're able to pay money, that can be tacked on as a judgment, ultimately, that can be civilly enforced later. So we do attempt to collect restitution, and we can preserve that civil claim through the criminal, not a civil claim, but that claim for restitution through the criminal charges. Crime victims also have the right to crime victims' compensation, generally for crimes of violence, which they may have suffered during this period of disaster or thereafter. And we do have a large victim witness division in our DA's office that helps people through their court appearances, filing their claims with the state, etc. Good question.
Let me give you an eye into how the federal system works in a situation like this, because we do have a continuing, we have contingencies for these kind of disasters. Almost immediately before the storm hit, Chief Judge Lee H. Rosenthal convened a group of working judges and courtroom personnel, prosecutors, folks who make up the criminal justice system and civil justice system in the Southern District of Texas to ensure that victims' rights would be preserved, that defendants' rights would also be preserved, and that the wheels of justice would continue to operate. And in that regard, we spoke every day in a teleconference to ensure that defendants' rights as well as victims' rights were being protected. As an example, we are required in the federal system to ensure that people who are arrested on a complaint are indicted within 30 days. Well, one of the problems that we had were that local citizens could not make it to the grand jury to hear these cases. So what we did in our district is we actually convened grand juries down in Laredo, in McAllen, in Brownsville, where obviously their courthouses were not affected, and we presented cases down there. All that to say that the criminal justice system continued to operate even during those days where we were closed here in Houston, in Victoria, Galveston, and Corpus Christi. So in a district this big like Southern Texas, we have 3 courthouses along the border, and we utilize the resources that we had there to ensure that everybody's rights were being protected and that the wheels of justice didn't come to a complete stop. Any other questions? Yes.
Do you have we have a large population of undocumented immigrants that are afraid to report crime most of the time because they're afraid that they're going to be penalized instead of help. What is the message to those people that have been or probably will be victims of fraud? Just like with
when the storm was taking place, the primary concern for law enforcement was for rescuing people. Didn't make a difference whether they were here legally or illegally. The primary purpose was to protect people. Now that we're in the recovery stages, again, we're going to listen to people who would give us information about crimes that are taking place out there, especially violent crimes, so people don't have to have fear of coming to law enforcement to provide information that would enable us to investigate cases, especially the type that we're talking about today. Because citizens who are here legally as well as people who are here illegally are going to be the targets of these types of crimes. We like to know about that information.
Would you like to say anything, Ms. Ogg?
Sure. I'd like to say that it's a crime to defraud anyone, regardless of their citizenship status, and that we will prosecute regardless of who the victims are if we can prove that intentional fraud was committed.
Just because you mentioned the prosecutions from during Hurricane Katrina, but I don't know if anybody can answer this question about a sense of what number-wise, dollar-wise, potentially the fraud that we're talking about, or even past natural disasters, how much that fraud has resulted, these kinds of crimes, how much money has resulted, the fraud in dollar terms.
I don't know the dollar amount, and it'd be hard to project how much money is going to be lost in terms of fraudulent activity. Hard to forecast that. If that's all, we're done here this afternoon. Thank you all for coming. Thank you very much. Please get the message out to our folks in the community. Really appreciate it. At this time, if you want to ask individual questions of anybody who's up here, feel free to do so.